On the early morning of August 21, 1996, Nhu Tuyat, a 15-year-old girl living in Lukkai village, Guntai district, Gansu Province, took advantage of the last days of her summer vacation to go to the mountains and collect medicinal herbs with her 57-year-old uncle, Kwang Ton. The two chatted happily in the cool early autumn weather. As they reached the northwest slope behind Lukkai village, Kwang Ton stopped and asked Nhu Tuyat, "Do you smell something strange?" Surprised by the question, Nhu Tuyat also stopped and took a deep breath to check. Indeed, there was a faint smell of burnt grilled meat in the air. However, the smell was peculiar, unlike the usual way locals cooked meat. It had a harsh and intense odor. If inhaled deeply, one could even detect a greasy, smoky scent mixed with the acrid smell of burning rubber. It was still early morning, and in this desolate and remote mountain area, why would there be the smell of grilled meat? Kwang Ton expressed his doubt, but Nhu Tuyat innocently replied, "There's nothing strange about it, uncle. On the top of this mountain, there's a flat grassy clearing. Young couples from the village often go there to meet. Maybe someone came here to camp, and the burnt meat smell is just their breakfast being prepared." But Kwang Ton objected to the girl's thoughts. He believed that over the past decades of living near this mountain range, no one dared to camp overnight there. The village elders often shared stories that wild animals still roamed these mountains. Even Kwang Ton himself, as a child, had accompanied many hunters to set traps in that area. They also spread rumors that deep within the mountain range, there are still wild tigers. How could anyone dare to camp overnight there? That would be nothing short of risking their own life. Despite her uncle's explanation, Nhu Tuyat remained pensive. She stubbornly believed that the smell of grilled meat, if not from campers, could not have come from anyone else venturing to this remote place so early in the morning. Thus, she asked for permission to explore and see if her assumptions were correct. The location where the uncle and niece were gathering medicinal herbs was not far from the grassy clearing on the mountaintop. So, Kwang Ton cheerfully agreed to let his niece go explore, showing no signs of worry at all. About 15 minutes later, while still searching for herbs below, Kwang Ton was startled by a loud scream from Nhu Tuyat. Her scream seemed to tear through the serene and peaceful atmosphere of the mountaintop. Fearing for Nhu Tuyat's safety, Kwang Ton dropped his basket and rushed towards the direction of the scream. When he arrived, he breathed a sigh of relief seeing that his niece was still safe. She was running away from the mountaintop, her face pale with terror. Kwang Ton hurriedly asked what had happened, and the girl, stammering, pointed towards a faint trail of smoke rising in the distance. "Uncle, it's a burned corpse, not someone camping here." Following the direction his niece pointed, Kwang Ton curiously went to investigate. When they arrived, a horrifying scene unfolded before Mr. Kwang Ton's eyes. Just as Nhu Tuyat described, there were two burning corpses at the site. One had been completely charred. Even more horrifying, the other corpse had only been burned from the waist down. The face of this body was almost entirely crushed, making it impossible to identify. From the hair, it could only be guessed that it was a woman. A wave of nausea and disgust hit the uncle and niece. Kwang Ton and Nhu Tuyat hurriedly ran down the mountain to call for help. When they reached the edge of the village, many people were gathered there. Seeing the pale faces and panicked expressions of the two, the crowd became concerned. But before anyone could ask, Kwang Ton announced the terrible news from the mountaintop. It turned out that the people gathered were the families of Luke Mai Van and Trong Deep An. They were also searching for the two girls, who had not returned home the previous night. Hearing the dreadful news from Kwang Ton, the families of Mai Van and Deep An quickly rushed up the mountain to check. Meanwhile, Kwang Ton ran to the local police station to report the case. The police in Guntai district, Gansu Province, upon receiving the report of two burned female corpses found on a mountainside in Lukkai village, immediately organized a team and resources to rush to the scene. When they reached the base of the mountain, they realized vehicles could not traverse the steep and narrow path. Investigators and forensic teams had to walk to reach the site. However, as they approached the mountainside, a sudden heavy rain began to pour. The grim atmosphere sent chills down the spines of those investigating the case. The howling winds echoing through the mountain crevices seemed like the mourning cries of the two unfortunate victims. After numerous difficulties in securing the site, the police and forensic experts finally reached the scene. However, when they arrived, the victims' families had already gathered around the bodies, wailing in anguish. The heavy rain and the crowd of curious onlookers had severely affected the crime scene, with many critical pieces of evidence destroyed. After evacuating the victims' families and the onlookers, the forensic experts began examining the bodies. Two corpses lay 1.5 meters apart. One body was completely charred and unidentifiable. The other was burned only from the waist down, with its face and skull entirely crushed and deformed. One of the victims' eyes was protruding due to the force exerted on the fractured skull. Notably, on the completely charred corpse, the forensic team found no traces of rubber or burned fabric on the soft tissue of the body. This was highly unusual compared to typical fire victims, whose bodies usually bear traces of clothing or burned materials. Based on this finding, investigators speculated that it was highly likely this victim had been sexually assaulted, with her clothing removed entirely before being set on fire. On the charred and contorted arm of the victim, the police discovered a metal wristwatch. The watch's hands had stopped at 4:33 a.m. that morning. Based on the wristwatch, the identity of the charred victim was confirmed as Deep Ann, while the other victim was Mai Van. Both girls were only 19 years old and lived in Luke Kai village. Mai Van's body was found 1.5 meters away from Deep Ann's charred remains. Forensics explained that although Mai Van was struck on the head with a heavy object by the perpetrator, she likely survived initially. After the perpetrator set the bodies on fire and left, it is believed that Mai Van regained consciousness and tried to crawl out of the fire. However, due to the fatal head injury, she could only drag herself a short distance before succumbing to her wounds. Despite the external burns, forensic experts found traces of semen in the victim's vaginal area during the autopsy. This sample was promptly sent for analysis at the Ministry of Public Security. Additionally, investigators discovered a lipstick in the chest pocket of Mai Van's clothing. The lipstick was brand new and had never been opened. Upon closer inspection, a female officer at the scene identified it as a luxurious and highly expensive brand. Only women from wealthy or prominent families could afford such an item. Meanwhile, Mai Van was a rural girl, making it highly unlikely for her to have access to such an expensive product. As the crime scene had been compromised by heavy rain and the crowd's interference, the police focused on interviewing witnesses and the victims' families to gather information for the investigation. The victims' families and friends confirmed that Mai Van and Deep Ann were considered the most beautiful girls in Luke Kai village. Although they had quit school to help their parents with work, the reputation of these two young girls was exceptionally prominent. Young men from neighboring villages knew about them and greatly admired them. During the day, even while working on the fields with their parents, they stood out with their beauty, like white lotus flowers blooming in a pond. In the evening, the parents of Mai Van and Deep Ann grew weary as groups of young men from their village often gathered outside their gate to chat and try to court their beautiful daughters. On several occasions, fights broke out with young men from other villages, leaving the parents worried and uneasy. Given their difficult financial situation, the parents of Mai Van and Deep Ann hoped their talented and beautiful daughters could marry into wealthy families, to escape the hard labor of rural life. Despite having many suitors, neither of the two girls had found anyone they deemed suitable. On the morning of August 20th, Mai Van and Deep Ann had arranged to go to the market fair to buy new clothes. By the afternoon, they had returned home. After dinner, they asked for permission to go out, but they did not return all night. Worried, the families searched for them. By this morning, after hearing the tragic news, both families confirmed that Mai Van and Deep Ann had no known conflicts with anyone. They were well-behaved, polite, and adored by the villagers, who all hoped to welcome them as daughters-in-law into their families. The information provided by the victims' families did not yield any clues for the police. Investigators convened to discuss and analyze the situation. The grassy area on the mountain peak is a beautiful spot, known not only to locals but also to young people from nearby villages who often come here for dates. Based on this, the investigators developed two hypotheses. 1. Due to their striking beauty, the two young women were pursued by dozens of men. 1. It is possible that among their admirers, someone wanted to possess them and cruelly resorted to rape and murder, disposing of their bodies on the mountain peak. 2. The perpetrators might have been familiar or particularly close to the victims. 2. This would explain how they managed to deceive or lure the girls to such a remote spot before committing their heinous acts. In both cases, it is highly likely that two or more perpetrators were involved. Given the age and physical condition of the 19-year-old girls, who were accustomed to hard labor in the countryside, it would have been challenging for a single person to overpower and murder both of them simultaneously. While the discussion was still ongoing, the clue about the lipstick found in the victim's pocket was brought up again. Upon further inquiry, the victim's sister provided a crucial piece of information. On the afternoon of August 20th, after returning from the market, my van had proudly told her sister that someone she knew had given her the expensive lipstick. My van even promised to give the lipstick to her sister. After dinner, the girl hurriedly asked for permission to go out with Deep Ann, leaving the lipstick in her pocket and not having the chance to give it to her sister. My van's sister added that she became curious when she saw her younger sister leaving in a rush before the family meal had even ended. She stepped out to the gate to see whom my van was going with, but she only saw my van heading alone towards Deep Ann's house. A short while later, she noticed a car driving past their house, heading in the same direction as my van. Since it was already dusk, she couldn't make out the details of the car. However, at that time, in a poor rural area like this, cars were extremely rare, so this unusual sight drew attention from several villagers. My van's sister also revealed that the man who had given the expensive lipstick to her sister was Trong Sao Lang, a man in his 30s who owned a large cement factory in the Guntai district. The investigators were puzzled about how my van, a young girl who had spent her entire life in the countryside, had managed to meet and form a connection with Trong Sao Lang, a wealthy businessman. They also questioned why he would give her such a valuable gift. At this point, my van's sister explained that 5 months ago, Trong Sao Lang's cement company had come to their village to survey and explore resources. During this time, Trong Sao Lang had met my van by chance. Initially, my van and her family were delighted when such a wealthy and charismatic man showed interest in her. However, later, through accounts from workers at Trong's company, my van's parents learned that Trong Sao Lang was already married. To avoid any scandal, they asked my van to sever all ties with him. Although the family had forbidden and rejected him, Trong Sao Lang, the factory owner, still occasionally visited and gifted the girl many valuable presents. In particular, there was even a time when my van's family was confronted by Trong Sao Lang's wife, who came to their house to berate and threaten them. After that incident, my van grew to despise Trong and always tried to avoid him, yet this shameless man continued to pursue her relentlessly. It's absurd. The one at fault was her husband, who stubbornly chased after my sister. But she, relying on her wealth and power, came to insult my parents. She even threatened that she would ruin my sister's life if she dared to continue interacting with her husband, my van's sister recounted. At this point, the investigators' expressions relaxed, as it became evident that Trong Sao Lang's wife had the strongest motive for committing the crime. Out of jealousy, she might have hired someone to murder my van and Deep Ann, the unfortunate victim who was with my van that fateful evening and unintentionally became involved in the case. However, the crime scene had been completely destroyed, leaving no evidence to directly identify the perpetrator. A special investigative team was formed with the mission of secretly monitoring and gathering all information about Trong Sao Lang and his wife. Through the investigation, the police discovered that behind the facade of a wealthy and powerful businessman, Trong was nothing more than a puppet controlled by his wife. All decisions were made under her command. In the past, Trong Sao Lang was merely a worker employed at his father-in-law's company. Thanks to his eloquence and tall, handsome appearance, he managed to win the heart of the company owner's only daughter. She was 6 years older than Trong and inherited the rounded physique of her wealthy father. After stepping into the affluent family and enjoying the luxurious life of the upper class, Trong Sao Lang began to change, especially after his father-in-law passed away. He grew increasingly tired of his plump, aging wife and frequently volunteered for business trips to remote construction sites. There, he sought treasures, young, beautiful, and naive girls from impoverished rural areas. Trong was caught red-handed by his wife multiple times and severely reprimanded, even in front of his workers. However, he remained incorrigible. One worker recounted to the investigators, "It's really miserable for the girls who were caught by his wife while having affairs with Trong. At best, they'd have their hair cut short. Some stubborn girls who refused to stay away from him were even dealt with by gangsters sent by her. I heard there was a girl who got pregnant with Trong's child, but she later had an accident that caused her to lose the baby. She didn't dare file any complaints because behind her cement and mining company, she had a cousin who was a notorious gang leader in the area." As the investigation deepened, the clues in this case became clearer than ever. The identity of Trong Sao Lang's brother-in-law was also confirmed. His name was Lee Kai Ban, nicknamed Lao Chao. Indeed, Lao Chao was a notorious gangster in Gun Tai district. The investigators had clashed with him multiple times, but he was extremely cunning and devious. With the substantial financial backing of his sister, Lee Kai Ban was like a tiger growing wings. He even crowned himself the uncrowned king of the region. Officially, he held the position of site manager for the mining company, but in reality, he oversaw land clearance operations for his sister. Anyone who resisted the company's arrangements would face intimidation and, in severe cases, physical assault orchestrated by him. Upon investigation, police discovered that on the night of the crime, Lao Chao was neither at home nor at the company. Notably, the car that had followed my van, which many young men in the village identified as belonging to the mining company, was actually assigned to Lao Chao for his use. Lao Chao immediately became the prime suspect in the case. It took only 2 hours of investigation for the police to locate him at the Gun Tai County Hospital. He had arrived there at 9 p.m. the previous night with a long burn wound on his right arm and a minor head injury. Lao Chao was promptly arrested while lying on his hospital bed. His face remained stoic as the investigators approached, showing no signs of fear, truly living up to his reputation as a local crime lord. However, at the police station, his arrogance quickly faded. When asked, "Who did you work with to murder and burn the bodies of my van and Deep Ann?" his defiant expression turned pale and panicked. Lao Chao responded, "Why? How could she be dead? I didn't even manage to hit her. Her boyfriend even fought back against me." The investigators were stunned by Lao Chao's response. He admitted that, upon discovering Trong Sao Lang had spent lavishly to buy gifts for my van, Lee knocked. Trong's wife asked Chao to teach that little tramp a lesson. Chao then ordered his subordinates to purchase acid to scare my van. So, is Lao Chao truly the culprit behind this heinous crime? Or is there still someone lurking in the shadows? Everything will be revealed in part 2 of this case. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and share to follow part 2, and help us reach our first 1,000 subscribers.